What is going on, Lions Nation? Welcome to the Lions Pulse. I am your host, Miko, uh, and we are about to have a really good show. Sorry, I have the stream up on one side, and I actually have like another screen up here as well. So hopefully that didn't come through the mic, but maybe it did. I don't know. Anyways, back to the intro. Welcome, guys, to the second stream of the week. Really excited to be able to talk Lions with you guys. As you guys can see in the thumbnail and in the title, something that I think is going to be a really good discussion. Something I'm really excited to give my thoughts on, um, because I'll be honest with you guys, this was news that I wasn't expecting to necessarily come across, as far as regarding the Lions, but kind of glad it did, and I have some mixed feelings about it. But we're going to get into all of that later in the show. Before we do all of that, if you are hanging out with me over on YouTube, you guys already know what to do. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new, and then after you do those things, do like these wonderful people are doing in the chat. I appreciate you guys so much. We got raw podcast in the chat with the early jump into the topic, and Raw, I'll at least address this. You don't draft a linebacker that high and not let him hit the ground running. He will make rookie mistakes. That's part of learning the transition of the NFL from college. Listen here, you don't have to tell me I'm in full agreement, but we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. Shout out to my guy Grit, showing some love to the stream with the blue heart, the lion emoji, and the football emoji. And then shout out again to my dude Big T saying, "What up, though, Miko? What up, though, Big T?" Yo, I'm really excited. I'm really happy to be out here, being able to do another stream with you guys. I'm gonna be honest. Let's be honest. This is a safe space. I'm always willing to be real and honest with you guys. I was excited to do today's stream simply because I thought Monday's stream was terrible. I thought I gave one of my worst streams, kind of put one of my worst performances out there. So I was chomping at the bit to kind of be able to do another stream, to be more engaged, to be more locked in. And yeah, sometimes you just don't have like your best day, but today's been a good day. My kids had their last day of school, so we are now full swing into summer mode. I officially now have a first grader and a soon to be seventh grader. It's about to be crazy. We have so many cool things planned for them over the summer, but right now it's an interesting time. Again, this, as you guys know, we talked about this a little bit last week. We're in the middle of the off season where there's not a lot happening as far as OTAs and mini camps. And we're kind of just like on in limbo up until training camp starts. And once training camp starts, then that's when it's like, it's going to be hot and heavy. There's going to be so much to talk about. There's going to be so many observations, literally from the first day of training camp until the next day. So really, really excited. But today we have a couple things that we're going to talk about. And yeah, just to be able to kind of pass the time as the off season goes. But before that, let me give a few more shout outs. Brent in the chat, she's saying, "Yo, what's good with you, Brent?" Rob Curley saying he will start, wait till the preseason games, giving a nod to what our first topic is going to be for the show. And listen here, Rob, since you're the last comment that we just had, and you kind of just addressed it, he will start. He being Jack Campbell. And this news kind of broke up again a couple days ago with some of the Lions position coaches being able to meet with the media and being able to answer and field a few questions. Kelvin Shepherd, who again is one of my favorite Lions coaches. If I could interview any Lions coach on the channel, Kelvin Shepherd is right there at the top of my list, literally number one on the list, simply because he's just so real, so honest, and he's not afraid to give his honest opinion of not just his players, but of the team and of how he kind of sees and how he goes about his business as a coach. So Kelvin Shepherd, in talking about the linebackers and in talking about, specifically Jack Campbell and how he's been received by the other linebackers and what the chemistry is like in the linebacker room now that they have Alex Anzalone returning, but then they went out and drafted a linebacker so high. There's obviously there was going to be some amount of questions, some amount of like going back and forth with players as far as like, hey, what's the plan? What's the layout of our room? Because we now have a rookie linebacker that was drafted really high. And Kelvin Shepherd, for all intensive purposes, basically laid it out that like, hey, just because Jack was drafted this high does not mean that he's guaranteed a starting spot. And hearing that come out of Kelvin Shepherd's mouth literally kind of like threw me a little bit. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this I know if you saw the thumbnail, um, where I'm basically saying like he might be benched, he might be coming off the bench. I'm not trying to be clickbaity. That's never something that I'm looking to do on the channel, but I am kind of again reading in between the lines where Kelvin Shepherd is basically throwing out there like, hey, if Jack isn't one of the best players, if he's not the best linebacker, if he's not the best middle linebacker, then he will not start. And for me personally, that has me torn because there are things that I hate about that statement and there are things that I understand and actually kind of like about that statement. But before we get into that, I actually have a poll running in the chat. If you haven't voted in the poll, please go do that now. But basically, I'm asking the question flat out: if Jack Campbell did not start Week 1, would you be upset? Would that bother you as a Lions fan to not see your 18th overall pick starting Week 1? Um, Once we kind of get through the segment, I'll stop the poll and we'll kind of see where we're at as far as like the votes. Right now, it looks like we're about 50-50. 50 if you say yeah, 50% of you say yes, 50% of you say no. So as you guys kind of go, as we kind of go through this topic, hit that poll. Let me know what you think as far as if you would be upset if Jack Campbell didn't start week one. Now, with that said, let's I want to give you guys like again my honest feelings and my honest opinion about this. And like I said, I am literally torn about this because there are things that I absolutely hate about this. And one of the things I hate about this, or the reason I hate this, is if you guys have been, tuning into these streams, have been watching me, talk about Jack Campbell. If you've seen my Jack Campbell comparison video, I think very highly of Jack Campbell. I've even has gone as far to say like I could see Jack Campbell win Defensive Rookie of the Year if he's starting Week 1. Now, and the reason I can say that is because I look at Jack Campbell and I look at his college tape and I look at what he's able to do athletically and in coverage and things of that nature. And from my perspective, again, as a fan and only looking at college tape and only, obviously doing my studying based off of YouTube videos, Jack looks like the best linebacker the Lions have had in a while. Athletically and instinctively, he just looks a little more complete than anything we've seen from any of the other linebackers. So I hate the fact that there's a possibility that he may not start, not because you know I don't believe in like competition, but I just honestly think that he is the best linebacker. I believe that he has all the tools that we as fans have been clamoring for from a middle linebacker for years now, probably since DeAndre Levy left, where you just haven't had that linebacker that could, not only, play in the middle as far as stopping the run, but also cover and be able to drop back in zone coverages or even be able to man up in some situations. And when you look at Jack from again just an athletics profile, looking at what he's been able to do in coverage, like he excels at that. And specifically, if you look at the counter of that and you look at Alex Anzalone, it's something that he struggles at. It's no again, Alex has been much better, especially last year. He was much better for this defense than he was in his first year here. But I still can't help but shake the fact that like I think Jack is just better. He's younger. He just seems like he's more ready to mold. And so I hate the fact that I have to look at a linebacker group and I can, feel fairly confident about my evaluation of the talent there and just feel like it's really hard to believe that Jack isn't the best of that group. Which leads me into the second reason that I kind of hate this idea that he might not start. Um Kelvin Shepherd kind of mentioned the fact that, like, hey, Derek Barnes is playing really well. Malcolm played really well last year and took a spot from a starter. And this group is all about competition. But from what we've been hearing, Jack has basically been repping with the second team through most of OTAs and minicamp, primarily because they want him playing middle linebacker. And because they want him playing middle linebacker, what that tells me was, well, then the competition was always between Alex and Jack, right? It was always if Jack wants the starting spot, he has to beat Alex, which that's something that I just kind of don't like because I feel like Alex has a certain level of favoritism amongst this coaching staff. We kind of saw it last year during Hard Knocks when Kelvin Shepherd again ripping into his linebacker room talking about how Malcolm's going to possibly take a spot from them and already saying before I think they had even gotten that deep into training camp, Alex has a starting spot. So before like a true competition had really unfolded, Kelvin Shepherd was already saying like Alex Anzalone is starting. And I feel like if if that was the same mindset that they're going into training camp with now, well, this makes this even more difficult for Jack because Jack is going to struggle. Like some of you have kind of pointed out in the chat, like he's a rookie. He's going to make mistakes. He's going to have miscues. Dan Campbell's even pointed it out and pointed it out in a positive context, might I add. Like he's not ripping him, but he's kind of said like, hey, he's made rookie mistakes, and there's no reason to not expect those. And if that's the case, if you're expecting rookie mistakes, Jack Campbell, again, because I think he's just the more talented player, the more talented linebacker, I would rather see him, again, paired up with Alex or paired up with Derek Barnes or someone who can at least like help him along the way and allow him to make the occasional mistake here and there. But he needs the reps. He needs, the time on task to be able to become a much better middle linebacker. So if this has always been the scenario of like, hey, Jack has to beat Alex, and if he can't beat Alex, he's not starting. That kind of rubs me the wrong way because if Jack is much better than Derek Barnes and if he's much better than Malcolm Rodriguez, well, he's clearly not going to play Will, but he should be on the field. So even if he's not the quote unquote better middle linebacker, if he's one of the better linebackers, I still feel like he needs to play the middle linebacker spot, and Alex needs to move over to Will, and he needs to be that mentor, and he needs to coach him up, and he needs to be that teammate that helps bring him along. And I say all that without again without knowing for sure if that's not the plan, right? It's very possible that if Jack is the second best linebacker on this team, that they will just move Alex over and they will just say, look, Alex, yes, you've been playing middle. Yes, you've been playing middle linebacker great during training camp, but Jack deserves time because he's just that much better than Derek and he's that much better than Malcolm. So we need you to play Will so that he can man the middle spot because we need him on the field. That is absolutely a possibility. Which leads me into some of the things, the reason why I love this. Why I love that Kelvin Shepherd is saying this is because I'm a huge believer that the best players should play. Right. I do truly believe in having true competition. And I love the fact that this team has been kind of rooted in that since Dan Campbell's arrived, that he's been all about like, hey, we're going to play the best guys. And if you want a starting spot, you have to earn it. And so I love the fact that like nothing is given to these guys. I think that's something that should be kind of carried out in society in general, that people just shouldn't be given things because that's how you become entitled. And that allows a culture of people to just be privileged and think that they don't have to put forth effort. When you actually have to work for something and you've had to grind and you've had to actually put in time to get something, you tend to cherish it more. You tend to take more pride in it. And so I love the fact that again, I love the fact that Jack has to compete for it, that it isn't just given to him. Kelvin Shepherd kind of said in most situations, in 20 other linebacker rooms, yes, Jack is probably given the starting spot day one because he's the 18th overall pick, and the position coach has no say so in that. That's not the case with the Lions. That's not the case with Kelvin Shepherd. Kelvin Shepherd has a lot of say. He gets to run his room the way he believes it should be ran, and that is based off of again the best players will play. And so I love that because I think that's going to allow Jack to really thrive in this environment. That if he really wants to start, if he really wants to live up to his expectations and I guess to some degree, like that 18th overall pick, he knows that he's going to have to beat out Derek Barnes, Malcolm Rodriguez, and like I just said a little while ago, Alex Anzalone. You're gonna have to go beat out a guy that put up 125, tackles last year. That a guy that this coaching staff believes in and has a lot of faith and trust in. You're gonna have to almost rip that away from him because, like I said, Alex is kind of rooted with this coaching staff. They trust him. They believe in him. Well, if you want to have that same level of trust, if you're Jack Campbell, you are going to have to work triple time, triple overtime to be able to get that. Um, and so that's one of the things that I do. I genuinely love about the fact that they're putting in this competition for him. Um, Another thing that I think, again, another reason why I love this, not necessarily connected to Jack, but is the fact that if Jack isn't starting and Derek Barnes is, that is a great sign for Derek Barnes. It's a great sign for the development of Derek Barnes. It's a great sign for Kelvin Shepherd. It's a great sign for Brad Holmes that he knew what he was doing when he picked this player. Because Derek Barnes is somebody that a lot of Lions fans have been waiting on. They've been waiting to see him kind of rise to the top. Because we've all seen like the flashes of potential as far as like with his athleticism, with his drive, with just the intensity that he plays the position with. And from everything that we've been able to hear so far out of the early, like, OTAs and minicamp, Derek Barnes looks light years ahead of where he was. Kelvin Shepherd went as far as to say, again, this was a guy who didn't understand like certain concepts, certain formations. And now he's being put in these situations where not only does he know where things is, but he's able to, bark out orders and be able to tell people where they're supposed to be. And that's a huge sign of growth. So if again, if Jack isn't quite there to the point where he can take a starting spot, and that's because Derek has, improved his game in such a way that not only has he, you know, leapfrog Malcolm, but he's keeping Jack at bay because he deserves to be the starting will. Well, then I it's hard to be mad about that because again, Derek Barnes is a player that I think a lot of us have wanted to see develop and to get to this point in his career where he's a day one starter or a week one starter for this team. So that's something that's really encouraging. Again, for Derek, for the linebacker group, and for Kelvin Shepherd and his ability to develop talent. And then the third reason I have to kind of take a step back and kind of check myself in this understanding in this way, right? If Jack is not the day one starter, that means that he went through training camp, he went through preseason, and whatever the deficiencies were in his game, the Lions felt that they could not put him on the field and still win games. And as much as we may want to see him on the field and see him out there week one against Kansas City and us feel comfortable with the idea of like, hey, he's a rookie, he's going to make mistakes, let him get his bumps and bruises. We have to kind of trust this coaching staff that they saw something in him where they were like, look, this is more than just bumps in the road as a rookie. These are mistakes that may cost us games. And when we're talking about this Lions team going and winning the division or making the playoff run or going to the Super Bowl, you can't afford to have a player make the kind of mistakes that doom a defense that results in you losing games. And again, I'm not saying that Jack would make these, but if that's the conclusion that they come to through evaluating him through training camp, through preseason games, through meetings and things of that nature, like, you know what, he's just not quite ready for that level of responsibility. There's a part of me that's like, you know what, I gotta take a step back. I may not like it. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, well, I love it, I trust them, whatever. But I have to understand that, like, at the end of the day, I'm rooting for this team to win games and to lock up a playoff spot and to win a playoff game. I'm not just rooting for Jack Campbell to get playing time, right? It has to go beyond just rooting for one individual player. Even though I believe Jack is that good, and I would love to see him get the opportunity to show off how good I think he is and the ability that I think he has to help elevate this defense. But at the same time, I have to also trust the fact that Kelvin Shepherd also determined that Malcolm Rodriguez was a better starter than any of the other linebackers. And for those first couple of weeks in the NFL season, Malcolm proved him right. And so if another opportunity comes up where Kelvin Shepherd has to make a tough decision between a Jack Campbell and a Derek Barnes, or a Jack Campbell and an Alex Anzalone, or a Jack Campbell and Malcolm Rodriguez, and Jack Campbell doesn't come out on top in that situation, I think Kelvin Shepherd has allowed himself, has given himself the room to trust that, you know what, that evaluation has to be spot on. And there has to be something that I missed in my evaluation that Jack just isn't quite there. And that's not a bad thing because he still has time to develop. Like I said, if Derek Barnes is the reason that he doesn't get a starting spot, and Derek Barnes went from a guy who had only played, middle linebacker for a single season at Purdue and now is earning a starting spot, we should feel really good about the development that a Jack Campbell can have under the tutelage of a Kelvin Shepherd. So that's kind of like my rant, my deep thoughts on just the possibility of Derek. I mean, I'm sorry, not Derek, of Jack not starting. That's just my thoughts on the possibility of Jack not starting. Let me jump into the chat because I want to see what you guys have to say and see where you guys kind of are with this possibility as well. Um, Grit saying, I'd rather he earn the starting spot than be given the job just because he's a first round pick. Nothing is given. And I agree, right? There's something to kind of like about that where it's like, okay, you would rather him earn it and prove to the coaching staff that he deserves that spot than it to be given to him. And then he goes out there and it's just like, wait, why is he starting? Because he doesn't look like he's quite up to the task. So that's that. I'm in full agreement with that grid. Rob saying it's a fair question, but football is football. When the whistle blows and the ball is snapped, Jack will be making plays. And again, that's something I truly believe as well. And again, all I have to go off of is college tape, but he did that enough in college for me to believe, in comparison to what the other guys have done, I just think Jack is just a few steps ahead, right? I was listening to Jeremy Reisman at the Pride and the Pride of Detroit guys talk about Jack, and they were kind of even saying like again in watching drills and watching, you know, how guys move on the field, there's a clear difference in Jack's athleticism versus any of the other linebackers. He's quicker to to the point of attack. He just looks and he has this intensity about him where you just kind of feel like, man, once they get pads on, like I think that's when we'll really start to see the real Jack Campbell. And it's kind of the same thing that kind of happened with Malcolm, right? Like once pads got put on, Malcolm slowly started to kind of climb above the ranks and kind of started to outplay guys because it was just like, yo, he's doing something that the rest of you guys just are not doing. And he's doing it, after being shown or taught it one or two times. Um, so I agree with you, Rob, that again, once the ball is snapped, I that's when I feel like we'll get to really see like the real version of Jack Campbell and the version of Jack Campbell that deserves or that will at least earn a starting spot. I don't even want to say deserves, but will earn a starting spot. Um, Miles saying I could see him rotating with Rodriguez and Barnes, and also saying, but I think he'll be a starter a few games in. Um, and again, that's a full possibility as well, right? Like just because Jack doesn't start out the season as the day one starter doesn't mean that he couldn't develop. Doesn't mean that he couldn't rotate in situations where where Alex Anzalone needs a break, or again, they just want to mix him in to be able to still get him that exposure because he can still, again, he doesn't have to play every snap to get, time on task. He can play a couple snaps here and there, play in certain situations and certain schemes. Again, if they believe that, for example, that Jack is better on third down situations than Alex, then maybe we start to see Alex come off the field in those situations and Jack go on because they just feel better about Jack in coverage and being able to police that middle of the field a little bit better than Alex could, or maybe they feel better about Jack's ability to line up with a tight end or something because of his athleticism. There's a number of ways where Jack could still see playing time without him necessarily being the week one starter. Um, Rob also saying Jack middle linebacker, Alex weak side linebacker or will linebacker is the plan. And that's the plan that I've been kind of running with since day one. That's been the thought process I've ran with since day one. It was that your week one starters would be Jack at Mike and Alex at will, and that they would just kind of roll with that. Now, I am intrigued by the possibilities and what we're hearing about Derek. I don't know if Derek has done enough to jump Alex, but again, if we're talking about if Kelvin Shepherd is preaching like, hey, we're going to play the best guys, we're going to play the best football players, um, I would hope that again that Derek Barnes gets just as much opportunity to get that will spot. So that even if Jack proves to be the better middle linebacker, if Derek proves to be the better will linebacker, then Derek deserves a start. And I would be very excited about the potential of those two playing next to each other, not just for this season, but for years to come. You know, manning down that or locking down that linebacker group for the Lions over the next few years. It would be really exciting. Um, Brent saying, what I like is that we finally have the depth to create this tough decision. That as well, right? That is something that I think all fans should be really excited about. The fact that we're in a situation where we're not talking about, a linebacker battle between guys who haven't really played the position at a high level. We're talking about a bunch of guys that have developed, some of them that have started, and we're saying like, hey, this is a tough decision. So much so that the second first round pick that you had also has to prove that he deserves the spot. And so that should be something that is exciting to have because again, for the last few years, it hasn't been that. It's been Alex Anzalone, and then it's like, yeah, we're trying to figure out who is best to start opposite him. And now you finally have some real competition. Debt Fan Man, what's good with you, man? Saying undoubtedly why he isn't starting is a paramount here. If he isn't starting due to character or other turd issues, well, yikes. If but it but if the draft's best linebacker is our second string due to depth, then hell yeah. And I agree with you, right? I think, and obviously, nothing we've heard had kind of raises a red flag as far as Jack having any type of character concerns. I think the worst thing that I've probably heard about Jack, and I don't even know if it's necessarily a negative, is that he can be hard on himself, right? That sometimes he's a little too hard on himself when it comes down to him making a mistake. And I think that can be rectified by just having solid coaching, by having solid guys in the room with him to basically let him know, like, hey, it's okay. Like, you made that mistake, learn from it. This is what you did wrong. This is how you get better at it. I mean, that was one of the things that we were hearing coming out of rookie minicamp and a little bit out of OTAs, is that when Jack did make mistakes, he rarely made the same mistake twice, right? Kelvin Shepherd was able to pull him to the side, coach him up, and have him go out there and do something again, and he do it better. Um, and again, that's, like I said, it's not a negative, but I do think it's something that probably, yeah, the Lions should kind of keep a little bit of an eye on, that, whoever his go-to mentor is, whether it's Alex, Derek Barnes, Malcolm, or just Kelvin Shepherd in general, like, keep an eye on him and pull him to the side at times, because listen, getting into the NFL, like, there's going to be games, there's going to be matchups that Jack is going to face, and like, you're not going to be the best player at all times. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be that, but when you're not, when you do have a bad game or when you get beat on a play, you have to be able to have that short-term memory to be able to, you know, take it, process it, understand what you did wrong, and then move on to the next play. You can't allow these types of things to just, beat you up and wear you down. Um, and so, yeah, Raw Podcast back in the chat saying they need to start Jack Campbell. Also saying you don't draft a guy that high and not play him. And again, I don't. I go back to something that who was it? I believe it was Miles who said, like, again, like, just because you could see him rotating in. I don't think this is a situation where Jack doesn't play at all. I don't think that we're going to be seeing a situation where Jack's inactive or anything like that. I just think if he's not quite ready to start week one, if they're not ready to give him the green dot, if they're not ready to give him the mic position, then again, I still think you'll see him get mixed in on certain, plays, on certain downs and distances, because what he provides, again, from just an athletic standpoint, just how athletic he is and the size he has, there's going to be times where I think Jack Campbell is just going to get thrown out there to be able to make an impact in various situations of a game. So, raw podcast, like you're saying, Jack Campbell will make rookie mistakes, but it will make him better. And I think they're going to allow those situations to kind of play out throughout a game. It may just not be the entirety of a game. I think they might pick their spots with him so that they don't put him in so many situations where he's creating too many mistakes. And again, like I said, he's already pretty hard on himself about those mistakes. You may want to limit the number of mistakes he exposes himself to, just for the betterment of his career for the long term, of just being like, hey, we don't want him making so many mistakes that he just, again, starts to kind of turtle up and kind of, be his own worst enemy in that sense, as far as just evaluating himself. Maybe you do limit his opportunities just so that he can, again, go out there, make a couple plays, feel good about himself, and slowly build confidence over time. Grit saying the best guys should start. Name, draft position, and or salary should never be the determining factor. That's how you lose games. I agree, right? Again, we've seen the Lions make those tough decisions in the past under Dan Campbell, right? I think it was the year when they signed Brashad Perriman and Tyrell Williams, where, again, on paper, like, well, those should be two of your better wide receivers, but they didn't play well, or they had injuries, or they didn't play well in camp or in preseason games, and so they were cut. And the Lions had to go into the season with a different cast of characters than we originally thought they would. And that's just going back to the idea, like, hey, they paid those guys, they signed them in free agency, but when it went down and it came down to, like, hey, who was performing in training camp, who was performing in these preseason games, those guys weren't living up to the billing, so they got cut. I think you'll see a very similar situation here with Jack in the linebacker position, and not just the linebacker position. If we're being completely honest, there are other positions on this team that, again, with position battles throughout training camp, where the best guy is going to play, and it may not be the guy we originally thought. You know, today in June, right? That may change completely once we get to training camp and once we get into some of these preseason games. 1991 Max Tech saying, "What up, Miko? Great point on coaches developing our linebackers. Imagine Campbell with a year of development under Shepard." And like I said, I have to find a positive in all of this, right? And I believe we all should, as fans. Like, if you just dwell on the possibility of this being a negative, they're like, well, Jack won't start, so this is the worst thing possible. You're missing out on another side of that coin, which is the development, which is the ability for these players to get better, because that does mean that there's something that they need to work on. I try to always tell myself, even with rookies coming in, you're not getting a finished product. You're getting a player that does need development. So the fact that they're maybe not ready to start week one isn't a bad thing. And honestly, it shouldn't even be a shock, right? Like, you drafted this player to hopefully develop them to be an all pro, a pro bowler, whatever they are. They don't all come in to be that way. Again, we're a good example is like Sam Laporta, right? Who was same school, drafted around later, is playing at such a way where he probably should have been drafted in the first round. But again, just because he's performing a little bit better than Jack is right now, doesn't mean that Jack can't eventually catch up. Doesn't mean that Jack wouldn't have a better career. They're just different players, and they develop at different times, and how they're going to be utilized on various sides of the ball and in their various position groups is going to vary. Um, so I think it's just something to kind of keep in mind. Um, Deaf Famine also saying, was it wild to you how Spielman introduced himself to Jack in the limo after the draft? Barry Rowan Gibbs, I thought Chris would have at least met the 18th overall before the draft to scout him. And I would assume that probably not, just because, again, I think they try to more so keep Chris Spielman in a specific type of role. I think Chris Spielman probably got to like watch tape on him and be able to give some analysis on him. But again, he's not necessarily part of the scouting department in that respect. I can't remember his exact role um, with the Lions. So maybe it's a simple fact of them just not trying to expose too many of their prospects, to players, that to people in the building that aren't necessarily, connected to coaching or connected to the scouting department. So probably it's a little weird in that sense, but I think obviously Chris Spielman was way more familiar with Jack and probably his game than Jack was probably with him, just having met him for the first time. Um, Fly the Dub saying they have to develop a first round pick. Yeah, all these players have to develop. Everybody, every last one. We talk about this with like we talk about this with quarterbacks, and nobody blinks an eye, right? Like, you look at all the quarterbacks that were drafted at the top of the first round. Do you think any of them are necessarily ready to take a team to the Super Bowl now? The answer would be no. Like, you don't think Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson are ready to take a team to the Super Bowl right now. Anthony Richardson specifically, right? We talk about how much development he needs. Well, then it shouldn't be a shock that like a linebacker that was drafted 18th, middle of the first round, also needs development. All of these players are going from a scheme that they ran in college for 3 to 4 years, and now have to learn an entirely new NFL scheme. They have to learn an entirely new pace of play, right? They have to understand how to prepare their bodies, how to study differently. So yeah, you're looking at development. Now how vast that development is. Yeah, you're hoping that it's less for a first round pick versus a third, fourth, or fifth round pick. You're hoping that you're having to do less development, but that just because the fact that Jack is going to probably have to develop, it shouldn't be a shock. Kelvin Shepherd said it, I think, perfectly, explaining the fact that they're going to ask Jack to do things with the Lions that Iowa didn't ask him to do, right? Whether that's blitzing, whether that's lining up in man coverage more often, whatever the case may be, like, they're going to ask him to do things that Iowa never asked him to do. So that's another area of development. So there's levels to this development thing when you start to look at it that way. Grit saying there's absolutely zero chance of it happening, but if Sudfeld outplays Golf, he should be QB1. Just saying. If Sudfeld outplays Golf, listen, guys. If any world that ever happens, we should all be hitting the panic button. That means something has gone seriously wrong. There's a glitch in the matrix. We all need to figure out like what happened. Somebody's clearly like body snatched Jared Goff and replaced him with somebody else because if Nate Sudfeld beats him out for the quarterback job, something's crazy is going on. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on again the whole like possibility of Jack Campbell possibly not starting. Um, Let me look at the poll right quick and kind of see what the results were. Um, So, would you so again, I asked that in the poll, would you be upset if Jack Campbell didn't start week 1? 60% of you said no, 40% of you said yes. Um, and again, if I had to be honest, if I was going to be completely honest with you guys, yeah, I'd be a little upset. I'd be a little bothered until the game started playing out and until I started to see, again, Alex proving to be a better linebacker than Jack Campbell. If I'm not seeing mistakes in the linebacking core, then yeah, I'll probably like have less of a gripe about Jack not playing. But if I see consistent mistakes at the linebacking core, subconsciously I'm gonna be sitting there like, there's no way Jack is not better than Alex, or there's no way Jack is not better than Derek or not better than Malcolm, whoever the case may be. Um, and that's just me being honest, right? So if I had voted, I would have voted in the yes column, and that's just me being fully transparent. But at the same time, I would understand why this decision was made. I could take a step back from it after and kind of put my emotions to the side and kind of analyze this and kind of start to see, okay, this is probably why he's not starting. So with that said, I want to kind of keep this podcast kind of themed to the defensive side of the ball. Again, since there's not a lot to like a lot of new news coming out during this time of year, I do want to kind of like spend some of the next couple of weeks looking ahead to training camp and just kind of like forecasting a couple things and giving my thoughts and opinions on what I think we can kind of look forward to when it comes down to training camp. So one of the first things I wanted to do, starting with this week, or at least starting with this stream, was I wanted to focus on a couple of defensive players who I think will shine during training camp. And I specifically was trying to focus on guys that we weren't hearing a lot about um, during like OTAs and minicamp. I was trying to focus on guys that we didn't hear much about during the last couple weeks, but I think we'll hear more about once pads go on, once there's actual hitting, once they're playing something that's seems way more familiar and way more similar to live football. Once training camp finally kicks off. Um, and so the first player that I have on my list, somebody that I think is kind of being a little forgotten and not talked about nearly as much. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the fact that the position he plays and what we should expect from OTAs and minicamp is edge rusher Julian Aquara. Julian is someone that this coaching staff, I believe, loves a lot, right? I think and I think they've been fairly open about what they like about Julian as far as his versatility, as far as being able to play the edge, play some linebacker in some situations. Um, but one of the things with Julian over the last few years, especially since he's been drafted, is that Julian has struggled to stay healthy. But, and I think that fact that he's struggled to stay healthy at times allows him to kind of like fall to the back of fans' minds of that, like he's actually like a really impactful and a key piece to this defense when he's healthy. He is one of those players that allows this defense to be so versatile and to be so multiple and to be able to mix and match so many different pieces because again, you can kind of line him up in a number of different areas. And so currently no one's really talking about Julian. When we're talking about who could potentially stop or start opposite of Hutch, the names that usually come up are Charles Harris. We talk about Romeo probably starting opposite of him. We talk about James Houston maybe deserving that spot because of how he played last year, and not a lot of talk is being put out there about Julian. And in fact, and I'll be completely honest, when I kind of look at the edge spot, I sometimes worry that Julian's not going to make it simply because of how many good players they have to play edge, and I start to kind of wonder like, okay, where do you fit Julian? But Then I kind of go back and I watch some of the games that he did play in when he was healthy, and specifically like that Bears game. Julian is again, he's probably one of their more athletic edges. He's one of those guys who can really kind of hang with these mobile quarterbacks, probably better than any of the other, edge players. And I think that's a combination of his size, his length, his youth. Again, being one of the younger guys, being only drafted, a few years ago, obviously under the old regime, but still relatively young. But Julian is someone that like I think will absolutely kind of rise to the top as we're able to again kind of get that reminder of why they kind of still even have him on this team because of that size, because of that power. And once he's able to go up against, you know, Sewell and Decker and being able to be a little more physical in the pass rush situations, I think we'll be able to kind of see why, Julian is still kind of hanging around. Um, Next player that I kind of have on the list is again kind of in a similar mold where I think we kind of just sometimes overlook him. But that being Jerry Jacobs, I think Jerry Jacobs is going to have an amazing training camp because I think one of the keys to Jerry's style of play is his physicality and his ability to really agitate and be rough and aggressive with opposing wide receivers. And right now, that CB2 spot opposite Cam Sutton, or maybe even CB1, I don't know, because we just finished talking about it with Jack Campbell. There's no guarantee that Jack is going to start just because he was the highest, drafted linebacker. I guess there's no guarantee that Cam Sutton is going to start, as CB1 just because he's the highest paid corner. But Jerry is someone that I think his best, like his ability shows up when he's able to actually be physical, when he's able to put his hands on receivers and be that type of like, sticky corner in coverage. And right now during OTAs and minicamp, he's not able to do a ton of that because again, they're limiting contact. Also because again, there's new faces in town, right? So there's way more attention being given to Cam Sutton, way more attention being given to CJ Uh, Brian Branch to an extent, right? And the fact that Tracy Walker is coming back from his Achilles injury, a little earlier than some expected. Like a lot of those guys are getting more attention than Jerry. And Jerry like also knows it, right? Like the fact that like these other corners are being talked about him, and I do believe that's kind of stoking a fire in him that once OTAs kind of kick off, or I'm sorry, not OTAs, once training camp kicks off, he'll be a full go. And I think he's going to try his best to put those other cornerbacks on notice that like, hey, whether it's CB1 or CB2, like one of those is mine. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Jerry comes out swinging, hopefully metaphorically, not actually fighting, but like coming out swinging and putting up a really tough battle for that other cornerback's position. Um, Next on my list is Aleem. Aleem McNeil is someone else that I fully expect to shine once pads get put on. I'm really looking forward to seeing Aleem kind of or hearing the reports about Aleem coming out of training camp because we all know about the fact that again he's down, he's gotten into better shape, he's changed his eating habits, lost a ton of body fat and is looking more agile and things of that nature. Well, Aleem is somebody that, like, for me, like, I gotta see it because one of the things that was like one of his calling cards was his size, was his mass, and obviously he's still hovering around that same size or same weight necessarily. But like, I'm really curious, and I'm kind of excited to see and hear how that like drop in body fat is going to affect his overall quickness and just how he comes off the line. And I think if he's able to do that, then again, once we get into training camp and he's able to line up against Frank and Big V and Jonah, if we start hearing and seeing that like, hey, Aleem is really giving it to these guys, if he's showing better quickness and things of that nature, that can do nothing but honestly build a lot of confidence in this defensive line because the interior of the defensive line is something that a lot of us were hoping the Lions would address more aggressively, both in free agency and in the draft. And shoot, even now, right? Like anytime a defensive tackle's name comes up that might be viable for trade, like Lions fans are kind of clamoring for it. But if Aleem starts showing some level of dominance once pads go on, this is going to be great. This should give us a lot of faith in what this defense can do heading into the 2023 NFL season. So that's the first 3 on my list. Let me jump into the chat really quick just to see what you guys are saying before I, kind of continue on. Full transparency, I have 8 players on this list. I tried to keep it to 5, and I was like, dude, I'm looking forward to this guy. I'm really looking forward to this guy. So yeah, I ended up just like saying, forget it, forget however many players. I'm just gonna pick my favorites. Um, Grit saying Pascal is my sleeper on defense, Mitchell on offense. We don't even talk about them. And I agree. There's a lot of, again, the Lions are in a really interesting situation right now where they have a lot of talent in a number of areas. And right now, not everyone is getting a lot of talk and a lot of shine because the new faces in town are, I think, are kind of dominating the conversation. I know with James Mitchell specifically, I know he's been kind of like in and out of OTAs because of injury, so I think that may be one of the reasons why we're not hearing a ton about him. But Pascal is another one that I'm a little surprised that we're not hearing more about. But I do kind of expect to kind of hear a little bit more about him once training camp kind of heats up. Um, Raw podcast saying training camp battles on defense going to be fire. I agree. I think again there are so many different areas on that defense when you're looking at defensive end opposite Hutch, defensive tackle next to Aleem. We just talked about the linebacker battle, earlier in the show. The cornerback battle is going to be super interesting. Um, I don't. I think safety's kind of set, right? I think it's going to be Kirby and Tracy, especially if Tracy's good to go. And then obviously you'll have CJ GJ at nickel, but those other positions on the defense, yeah, it's going to be very very exciting to kind of see how that all plays out. Uh, Deaf Fan Man saying way to not take the bait with the cheesy joke and offer him as Aleen McNeil. He does look different though. I didn't even think of that one. That's a good one though. Aleen McNeil is people are using that. I'm assuming somebody's probably used it by now. They shouldn't. It's a corny joke. All right, so let me jump back into my list. So that was the first three. Number 4 on my list. Actually, I'm gonna jump down to the number 5 person on my list because he was mentioned, and that's actually Josh Pascal. Josh Pascal is someone else that I think is really going to turn heads at training camp once they put on pads. We have to remember that he wasn't able to take part in training camp last year because he was dealing or he was recovering from, I believe it was the groin injury. So we didn't get to see Josh until much later in the season. But like we have to remember, he was a second round pick. He was someone that the Lions thought very highly of, and he was somebody that I was very excited for. Prior to him missing time and with that injury, I honestly expected him to outplay Aiden at times. I thought like if he had came into the season, if he had been able to get more snaps, I thought he would probably put up better numbers than Aiden just because I just loved his versatility. I loved his ability to be so strong in the run game, to be able to kick inside, to be able to pass rush from the inside. He showed real good just quickness and strength at that edge position. So Josh is somebody that I'm very excited for once they get into training camp because I think we're going to see everything that got him drafted in the second round on full display. I think we're going to be able to see that quickness, that power, that versatility, and I think he's going to again be one of those pieces that wasn't available for this defense throughout the year, like not until like that back end stretch when they started to play more consistently. I think he's going to be able to provide a level of juice and excitement to that defense that they just didn't have at the start of last year. So he's someone that I'm very very excited about, and I think is really going to turn heads once they throw the pads on because he's really going to be able to obviously again have contact, go against these offensive linemen, and not just I don't think he's going to just outright beat these guys, but I think again going through those tough matchups with Ragnow or Jonah or even on the edge with Panay and Decker, like that'll help him get better. We saw what it did for James Houston, being able to go up against Taylor Decker and Panay Sewell in practice and training camp, and how that helped him get better as the year went on. I'm expecting so much of the same from Josh Pascal. And I think the fact that again we kind of forget second round pick last year, which means that they have a very strong feeling about him and his ability to contribute, to this defense. So um, from one second round pick to another, I got to go with my guy Brian Branch. I know Brian Branch did get like some love and some acknowledgement, throughout OTAs and minicamp. But Brian Branch to me is really, really going to make a scene once they put pads on. And once he's able to go, all right, maybe not full speed, but like 75% or whatever they allow them to go in training camp, I think he is going to flash. We're already hearing how, in OTAs and mini camp, like he's there mentally. He's recognizing offensive concepts, he's shouting out orders, he's being vocal. And again, this is obviously with like second and third team, defense, but he's showing the things that first of all got him a starting spot at Alabama as as a freshman, but again, the thing that got him drafted in the second round. And so, we're hearing about them using him in blitz concepts and, how he's just, proving to be a savant in that. I cannot wait until they put pads on because, again, that'll not just help him, but also kind of unlock this defense to be able to see, okay, how does he take on offensive linemen? How good is he if when getting chipped or things of that nature? Can he kind of fight through that type of stuff and you know really be an impact player for this defense? Um, I'm really excited again to kind of just see Brian Branch kind of live up to again what I think. I think he's still arguably the best player they drafted in this past draft. I have so many high hopes for Brian Branch, and Aaron Glenn has already kind of came out and said like they don't know where they're going to play him, but they're going to try to get him on the field. So again, whether it's in blitz situations, there's been like rumors going around that like, hey, maybe they might use him as like this hybrid linebacker at times. I'm ready for it all. So I really can't wait to see Brian Branch once they put on pads and kind of see how he's developed in that capacity. Next on my list, another second year player in James Houston. So again, James Houston is someone that we're not hearing a ton about in OTAs and minicamp. Again, I think it's because again, defensive linemen just can't do a whole lot. They don't have pads on. They're not able to do these one-on-one drills and things of that nature. But James Houston is someone that I think is also going to remind people again and showcase how he's gotten better. And I think he's going to have to as well. Um, Obviously, coming out of Jackson State last year, there was obviously going to be a learning curve being a 6th round pick. But now, like everyone is aware, everyone knows what James is capable of doing as a pass rusher. So getting him into training camp, getting the pads on him, being able to see him again, going against Panay, going against Taylor. They're even talking about using him as an off-ball linebacker in situations. So seeing how he handles those responsibilities is going to be really key to seeing how frequently James Houston even gets on the field or be able to project how frequently he'll get on the field because, like we talked about, this edge group is deep. And so all of these guys are going to have to really kind of rise to the top to be able to prove why they should be on the field because you have Aiden, you have Kaminsky, you have both Aquaras, Charles Harris, and Josh Pascal. There's a lot going on in that group. So James is going to need to not only does he have to show up, but I'm expecting him to. I'm expecting him to be able to take the things that he learned last year and to apply them into training camp to get even better, and to be a real problem and to kind of again put this coaching staff in a tough position of trying to figure out like, okay, how many snaps do we not give him instead of like how many snaps do we give him? Like how many snaps do we not give him because he's just that impactful on the defensive end? Another guy that like I'm expecting big things from in training camp once the pad goes on is Christian Covington. And I'm kind of surprised, like when I was really going through this, I was kind of surprised that I put Christian Covington on this list. But the truth of the matter is, from everything we heard coming out of OTAs and minicamp, Christian Covington was getting those first team reps next to Aline. And that doesn't mean a whole lot again in OTAs and minicamp, but the staff has to be doing that for a reason. Now, some people are saying that's strictly because of seniority. Christian Covington is the oldest defensive lineman they have on the team. So there's possible that he's getting a lot of these, early snaps or a lot of this work with the first team strictly because he's one of the older players. But I'm also of the belief that like he's getting this work because he's also showing that he's kind of like deserving of it, even if it's just on one-on-one drills, even if it's just in the classroom. Like he's showing that he's deserving of some attention. And I'm kind of one of the reasons I'm looking forward to seeing how he performs is I originally thought Christian Covington was going to be like just like a camp body, that's somebody that we were going to see get cut right after minicamp or right after OTAs. And the fact that that hasn't happened has me curious. I'm kind of more now my now he has my attention, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does um in come training camp and once they finally put on pads. And last but not least, it shouldn't be a surprise, but someone else that I'm expecting to really shine, show out, really kind of get the coaching staff and the fan base's attention once pads go on the defense side of the football is Jack Campbell. I think if we're talking about Jack potentially not starting, and we're talking about that in OTAs and minicamp, that's kind of fair because there's not. I think what Jack does best is not has not been put on display yet. And I think once we finally get to hitting, once we finally get to a point where he's able to again go as close to full speed as he possibly can, that's when we're going to see the best version of Jack Campbell. And that's when we're going to see a guy who should be starting week one. Um, Again, I can't help but just go back to the tape and see a guy that had amazing instincts, was great in coverage, was great at flying to the ball. I just think, like, again, we just got to get him in pads and kind of give him the green light to go play football, right? It's still obviously learning the game and learning tendencies and learning how to read things, but getting him in a situation where he's able to like just trust his instincts and play and use his athleticism, I think is really going to benefit Jack come training camp. And I think that's when he's going to lock up this starting spot in the same way that Malcolm did once they got into pads, once they got into, more live football situations where he could demonstrate his strength and his savviness as a linebacker. That's when I think Jack is going to really shine. Um, so yeah, those are my 8 guys that I'm kind of like expecting to shine once training camp kind of starts. Some of them I'm kind of curious about, but some of them I really do think are going to kind of make a name for themselves. Um, you know, Once training camp kind of kicks off. Let me look into the chat. Let me see if there's anybody that you guys kind of want to throw out in the chat that you guys kind of have your eyes on. Please throw it in the chat, and I'll read them off and give my thoughts on it. Mark LeBay saying Brian Branch is part of the squad that will shut down running QBs. Again, I'm truly just excited for what Brian Branch is going to do on the field, period. Like, I'm so open to them utilizing him in whatever way they see fit. I'm of the belief that he's a guy that has to get on the field. No matter what the situation is, no matter what it takes. I don't care if he has to play linebacker. I don't care if he has to play an additional like nickel. Like, I don't care what it is. Get Brian Branch on the field because I really want to see him. In fact, I reached out to Eric Schlitt over at Pride Detroit, who is also a really big Brian Branch fan. I'm trying to get Eric on the podcast because I need someone else to like help me sing the praises of Brian Branch. So hopefully keep your fingers crossed for that, guys. Hopefully I can lock down a date with Eric and we can kind of get him on the stream and he can tell you in better words because he's actually seen it up close what makes Brian Branch so amazing. Big T saying, I'm curious about Iffy. Iffy is another one where, again, we're starting to kind of see him, or at least hearing that he's making strides, that he's making improvements at the safety position. And I think I said this like last week or some point. When you look at Iffy just physically, he just looks like he should be a really good safety, right? With the length, with the muscle definition. Like, he just looks like somebody who should be able to play that position really well. And I think we have to like acknowledge the fact that, again, he was just learning this position last year. And so there has to be a little bit of a learning curve. And I get that we want to put players on timetables and be like, well, you should have learned it by this much time. But again, if he kind of even said it when he met with the media, like he kind of felt that like, hey, a move to safety would happen at some point in his career. He just didn't think it would be this soon. And I heard someone else say this, and I was glad someone else said it. And I can't remember who exactly it was, but they pointed out like Iffy's move to safety kind of felt undeserved because he played fine at corner. They felt like that he was playing well enough at corner to develop as a corner. And they just kind of moved him to safety kind of out of the blue. And which is funny that someone else said it because I truly did believe the same thing. Like, I thought he played fine. I mean, obviously as a rookie, but I thought he showed enough signs at corner to develop into a good corner. Well, now he's accepted his role at safety, and so hopefully he can pick up that same level of development. But I'm also very interested in Iffy as well. Um, Brent also saying Iffy was my guy also. Yeah, yeah. I think there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna be kind of having an eye on Iffy and that are gonna be kind of rooting for him because again, learning a new position and then still struggling with injuries on top of that, like I would love to see Iffy get a fair shot at it and to be able to really learn and develop in that position and provide some depth there because I think he could be very good at it. Um, BP saying, "Will Julian Okwara make the team?" And like I said, it's a tough thing for me to say for sure that he will. I asked the same question to the Pride of Detroit guys today during their stream. They tend to like do these, midweek mailbags. I think like every Wednesday or so, and that was one of my questions. Was like, hey, could Julian's spot be in jeopardy? Especially because they're talking about James Houston getting some play at linebacker, which was something that they were also looking at doing with Julian, is getting him some play at off ball linebacker for certain situations. And while Julian should absolutely be concerned that again that they're even looking at utilizing James Houston in a similar fashion, and the fact that again looking at Brian Branch might get used in some linebacker situations, it could cut into what he's able to do. But I'm still a big believer in what Julian offers, still just as an edge rusher. Again, you don't have too many edges on the team beyond like I mean again that are locked up for the future that also have youth on their side and Julian's one of those guys. Now Julian's biggest thing though again in my opinion is that he just has to stay healthy. He has to show that he can play close to a full season without getting these freak injuries that take him out for long stretches of the game. But could he be cut? Yes, it's a strong possibility. I just don't know. It comes down to how many edges. Put it that way. Depends on how many edges they decide to take and where they decide to list guys, right? As far as like, for example, Josh Pascal and John Kaminsky can both kind of jump back and forth between defensive tackle and edge. If they decide to do that and kind of list them as defensive tackles, and let's say like Levi doesn't make it, um, there is a scenario in which Julian could make the team. But I think again, I think that's why training camp is going to be big for him because he's going to have to remind these coaches of what he brings to the table. Um, and so I have a good amount of confidence that Julian will be able to do that. Debt Fan Man said, "You already talked about him, but if Derek Bonds is really a starting linebacker in week one, that would be arguably the biggest surprise of the entire offseason. Just wild." Yeah, I think so. Considering what we thought would happen at linebacker from the minute Jack Campbell was drafted, I think we all immediately thought Jack Campbell, Alex Anzalone. And if it wasn't Alex Anzalone, Malcolm, right? Like that Malcolm would be it would be or if it wasn't Jack, it would be Alex and Malcolm still, and Malcolm would still have that starting spot kind of locked up. The fact that Derek Barnes, again, early in OTAs, but it looked as though he had leapfrogged Malcolm, before Malcolm had even got hurt, is a huge, is a huge deal in my opinion. And so yeah, it would probably be the biggest, surprise of the offseason as far as again, guy that I didn't think would actually um Derek Barnes was somebody that I was kind of looking at that might get cut. The same way Big T is saying that like Julian Okwara might get cut. I was thinking the same thing about Derek Barnes prior to OCAs and minicamp kicking off because I just didn't see where the Lions would be able to use him because he doesn't do a lot of special teams things. And if Malcolm was out playing him still, I didn't see where they were going to be able to fit him on the team, especially when Jalen Reeves-Maybin is probably making the team strictly off of special teams alone. So it's definitely interesting to see how this all is going to play out. Um, Huggy Bear in the chat saying, "I'm interested in seeing if Charles Harris can regain his level of play he had when he first became a Lion." Yeah, Charles Harris, and that's the other thing too. Again, that makes the Julian Okwara thing interesting is that while Julian again has to solidify his spot on the team, you have guys like Charles Harris and Romeo Okwara who are both coming off of injuries who are going to have to prove that they can return to form. They can return to what they were able to do when the Lions gave them like big contracts, and obviously they restructured those contracts and things of that nature, or they took pay cuts. those guys are still gonna have to prove that they're worth retaining. And if they can't do it, again, I think it bodes well for Julian's, case to be able to make the team if he's able to outplay a Charles Harris, if he's able to outplay his brother in that situation. Obviously, he would probably hate to see his brother get cut. And I feel like that goes mutually for both of them. They would hate to see the opposite one get cut. Um, but I think again, those three guys, or I said it when Jeremy was here on the stream during our interview. I genuinely think that that edge two spot is literally a toss up. I think you might, Charles Harris and Romeo Okwara probably are like leading the pack as far as who gets the quote unquote starts. Um, but I think any of these other edges during training camp and during preseason games are going to have equal opportunities to kind of steal that position away from those two, and potentially, cost them a roster spot. CJ Rose saying Malcolm probably ends up taking more special team snaps this year. And yeah, I would expect that to be the case. And I still expect Malcolm to probably get some snaps even at linebacker in certain situations. And that's mostly because again, like I think they want this defense to be able to conform and match up with whatever offense they're going against. And that could require some guys seeing more or less snaps on any given week. Which again, going back to Julian, is one of the reasons why I think they might end up keeping Julian because he just has that versatility that some other of the edges might not have. So it's really going to be interesting to see just kind of what unfolds once training camp kind of kicks off. But guys, that's pretty much going to do it for today's stream. I appreciate you guys hanging out and spending so much time with me and being able to kind of have this free flowing conversation. Again, I thought the stream was a little bit better last week or earlier this week. That stream wasn't as good, and I felt kind of bad for giving you guys a really just not up to my standard of a podcast. But again, appreciate you guys coming by. Be sure to hit the like button if you haven't already. Hit the subscribe button if you're new here. Feel free to share this channel with other Lions fans, your friends, your family. Because again, I'm all of those things. Not only do they help this channel, but again, they your guys' feedback and all that stuff helps me become a better streamer and a better YouTuber. And that's something I'm definitely looking to grow and become. So appreciate you guys. There will not be a stream this Friday. I'll be back on Monday. We'll do a fresh stream on Monday. Find some other things that we can talk about Lions related. And yeah, again, appreciate you guys. Hope you all have a great evening, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.